Eleanor Whitfield set the little leather diary on the anniversary tablecloth, smoothed the page with one ringed finger, read Adrian's most private sentence aloud to all 18 of them, and smiled. "Now they all see," she said. "You'll never belong here." Eleanor believed she had just shut a door for good. What she had really done was hand a patient woman the last reason she needed. The house Eleanor ran like a throne, the white two-story on Dove Creek Lane that made her somebody in Renfro, Georgia, was not hers anymore. It had not been for almost a year, and the only person at that long table who knew it set her wineglass down on its coaster, folded her napkin once, and said nothing at all. The dining room smelled of pot roast and the lemon oil Eleanor worked into the good table twice a year. 20 years Adrienne had sat there. 20 years of Easters and christenings and 2 funerals. She had married Dexter Whitfield at 27, and she was 47 now, and in all that time she had learned to read a room the way she read a dying patient. So while Eleanor performed, Adrienne was not even hearing the words. She was watching Eleanor's hands. There was a fine tremor in the left one. A pill bottle lay tipped on its side in Eleanor's open purse, the cap not screwed down right. A chalky color sat under the powder on her cheeks. More than 20 years of hospice nursing had taught Adrienne to notice the body telling the truth the mouth refused to. Eleanor looked like a woman running on fumes and pride. Adrienne filed it away the way she filed everything. Quiet, dated, certain. And there, half under the spilled pills, a business card stuck up at an angle. Adrienne caught one word on it before Eleanor's elbow swept the purse closed. A name. Sutton. She did not yet know why a woman with no money troubles would carry a stranger's card like a secret. She would. The sentence Eleanor had chosen came from the week of Walter's funeral. Adrienne had written it at 2 in the morning in her own locked book, for no eyes but her own. Some days, I think Walter was the only Whitfield who ever made me feel like this was my home, too. Eleanor read it slow, savoring each word so the whole table could taste it. Her home, Eleanor repeated, and gave a soft little laugh. Did you all hear that? 20 years, and she still talks like somebody we let in the door. 18 people. Not one of them moved. Dexter studied his plate like it held instructions. A cousin's fork hung in the air. Somebody's little boy started to ask a question and got hushed. Nobody told Eleanor to stop. Nobody reached for Adrienne's hand. The clock on the sideboard kept ticking, and that tick was the loudest thing in the room. Under the shock, one cold fact moved through Adrienne, clear as a blood pressure reading. That diary had a small brass lock on it. She kept the only key on her ring, between her car key and the key to the med cabinet. She had left the book in the bottom drawer of her dresser, in her own bedroom, down the hall in this very house. So how, exactly, was it lying open on Eleanor's anniversary table? Adrienne did not give her the scene she had paid for. She set the glass on the coaster, because even now she would not leave a ring on Walter's table. She stood. She thanked Eleanor for the dinner in a voice that did not shake by even a hair. Then she walked out through the kitchen, past the casserole dishes, and the peach cobbler nobody would touch now, out the side door, down the porch steps Walter had built with his own hands, to her car. Her hands were steady on the wheel. They stayed steady the whole way down Dove Creek Lane. That was the night Eleanor Whitfield believed she had won. 1 week later, she would be sitting in a lawyer's office just off the courthouse square, watching a single sheet of paper slide across a desk, and every bit of that steadiness would be on the other side of the table. But to understand how a soft-spoken hospice nurse undid the proudest woman in Renfro without ever once raising her voice, You have to go back. Let me take you back. Adrian had been Adrian Carter long before she was a Whitfield, and she had been a nurse most of her life, hospice mostly, the hard kind, the last kind. She was the one families called when there was nothing left to fix and everything left to honor. On that kind of work, you learn the truth lives in small things, a change in a breath, the hour the pain climbs, which grandchild a fading mind asks for first. Adrian charted all of it by hand, dated, initialed, every note timed to the minute. She trusted ink, not memory. Decades at the bedsides of dying people had taught her one plain thing, and she believed it the way other folks believe scripture. The record is the only thing in the room that never lies. That habit was about to matter more than she could have known. The house that held the whole family was the white two-story on Dove Creek Lane, 20 minutes south of Macon, with the wide front porch and the swing Walter hung himself. When Walter got sick, Adrian and Dexter had moved into the back bedroom so she could nurse him through the nights. After the funeral, they simply stayed. Eleanor stayed too, up in the big front room, and went right on ruling the house and every soul under its roof. Sunday dinner at Dove Creek was never an invitation. It was a summons. The porch swing was the soft heart of the place. Walter had wrapped its chains in old garden hose so they would not pinch small fingers. Adrian's granddaughter Ruby, 6 years old and afraid of nothing, had worn the paint clean off one armrest. All the Whitfield grandbabies had. It was supposed to be that kind of house. The kind that gets handed down, not sold off. Walter Whitfield had been the one Whitfield who never made Adrian feel like a guest. He called her his daughter, never once his daughter-in-law. In his last year, as the illness took his strength a piece at a time, it was Adrian who sat up with him, Adrian who measured the medicine and watched the clock, Adrian who read him the farm report because he liked her voice, who turned him so gentle he barely woke. Eleanor came in to fluff a pillow when company was around to see it. Dexter could not stand the smell of the sick room. The rest of the family sent cards. Adrian stayed. The week before he passed, Walter caught her wrist with what little grip he had left. He pressed a sealed envelope into her hand. Thick paper, a real wax seal, her name written across the front in his shaking print. "Don't open it till you need it," he whispered. "The house is already where it should be." She thought it was the medicine talking. She slipped the envelope into the zip pocket of the nursing bag she carried to every shift, the bag that never left her side, and in the long fog of grief that followed, she let herself forget it was there. The diary stayed locked in her dresser. The envelope rode everywhere with her, unopened on the seat of her car, into the homes of the dying. She had no idea she was carrying the answer to all of it around in her own hands. Eleanor had a gift for the small cut, 20 years of it, sharpened to a point. At Adrian and Dexter's wedding, she had told the photographer to be sure and get one good shot of just the real family, and stepped Adrian neatly out of the frame. When the AME church on Route 11 asked Adrienne to help serve the deacon's supper, Eleanor said, "Wasn't it nice they let nurses do that now?" Christmas after Christmas, the little place card with Adrienne's name turned up at the children's table, or at no table at all. Adrienne never once took the bait. People in Renfro mistook that calm for weakness. They had it exactly backwards. That night, after the table emptied and the cobbler went cold on the counter, Dexter found her in the back bedroom. She was not packing. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her coat still on. "Mama's real upset," Dexter said. "You embarrassed her, walking out like that." Adrienne looked at the man she had given 20 years. She read my diary, Dexter, out loud, to 18 people. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. "You know how she gets." He sat down, but not close. Just go and apologize to her in the morning. Smooth it over. For me. For the family. Everything's easier when everybody's getting along. Easier for who? Adrian said. It was not a question. He did not answer that one. He reached instead for the line she had heard 100 times across this marriage. The line that finally landed different tonight. She's my mother, Adrian. I can't go picking sides. But he had. He had picked his side 20 years ago, and every Sunday since. And he was picking it again right now, sitting 2 feet away with his hands folded in his lap like a man at the back of a church he didn't really attend. Something settled in Adrian then, clean and final. No raised voice, no slammed door, just a door, somewhere inside her, easing quietly shut. She had spent 2 decades holding up a family that called her company, holding up Eleanor's name, Eleanor's house, Eleanor's whole version of the story. She thought about all of it, sitting there in her coat with her steady hands in her lap, and she made a decision that did not look like a decision at all. I never raised my voice, she would say later, when people asked her how. I just stopped holding it up. The next morning, Adrian did not apologize. She got up at 5, the way she had for 30 years, and she put the coffee on, and she sat down at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and the same fine point pen she used for charting. At the top of the page, she wrote a date. Then she wrote another one under it. She set about doing the only thing she had ever truly known how to do, the thing 20 years of bedsides had made as natural to her as breathing. She started keeping the record, and the very first question the record wanted answered was a simple one. How does a woman with a tremor in her hand and a tipped-over pill bottle in her purse, and a stranger named Sutton tucked in beside it keep a house the size of Dove Creek running, year after year, when there had not been real money in the Whitfield name for a long, long time? The county courthouse in Renfrew sat on the square where it had sat for 110 years. Red brick gone soft and pink at the corners, the flagpole out front leaning a degree off true the way it had leaned since before Adrienne moved to town. She parked her car on Route 11 across from the diner, fed the meter 2/4 out of habit even though nobody in Renfrew had checked a meter in a decade, and walked up the worn stone steps with her nursing bag over her shoulder. She did not need the bag for what she was doing that morning. She carried it because it steadied her, the way some women carry a Bible. Inside it, in the zip pocket, Walter's sealed envelope still rode where it had ridden for a year. She had not opened it. She was not ready. But she had begun, that week, to feel its weight against her hip like a hand on her shoulder. The records room was in the basement, down a flight of stairs that smelled of old paper and floor wax and the particular cold that lives under courthouses. A young woman named Patrice sat behind the counter with a paperback, turned face down beside her. Adrian knew her people. Her grandmother had passed at the hospice 2 winters back, and Adrian had sat the last night with her so the family could sleep. "Miss Adrian?" Patrice said, and her whole face changed, soft and glad. "What you need today?" "Deed records," Adrian said, "and anything filed against a property, liens, mortgages, the lot. The White House on Dove Creek, the Whitfield place." Patrice did not even have to look it up by address. Everybody in Renfrew knew the white 2-story the way they knew the church and the water tower. She went to the long shelves of bound volumes, the great heavy books with their marbled covers, and Adrian settled herself at the reading table with her yellow legal pad and her fine point pen, the same pen she charted with, and she uncapped it and waited. This was the part Adrian understood better than she understood her own marriage. The record. 20 years of hospice had built into her a faith that bordered on the religious, and the article of that faith was simple. People lie, bodies do not. paper, properly kept, does not. A morphine dose at 3 in the morning, charted and timed and initialed, will tell you the truth about a night that everyone in the family will remember wrong by breakfast. She had testified in 2 wrongful death suits in her career, and both times the lawyers had marveled at her charts, and both times she had wanted to tell them it was nothing. It was only attention. It was only refusing to look away. The truth was always there. Most people simply could not bear to write it down. Patrice set the first book in front of her, heavy as a paving stone, and Adrian opened it to the index and began to read the chain of the house on Dove Creek Lane, the way she would read a patient's history, from the beginning, taking nothing for granted. The house had come into the Whitfield name in 1961, bought by Walter's father with money from the lumber business that no longer existed. It passed to Walter when his father died in 1988. There it sat, clean and quiet in the record. Walter Whitfield, sole owner, year after year, decade after decade. Adrienne wrote the dates down in her small, even hand. She initialed the entry, Habit. Then she turned the page to the most recent years, and her pen stopped. There was a transfer. The house had moved out of Walter's sole name, not at his death, before it. The index showed a deed recorded in the spring of the year Walter died, months before the funeral. A transfer from Walter Whitfield to a grantee the index gave only by a book and page reference, a thread you had to pull to see where it led. Adrienne stared at that line a long moment. The cold of the basement seemed to come up through the floor and into her hands. Walter had moved the house while he was still alive, while she was nursing him, while Eleanor was upstairs fluffing pillows for company. She did not ask Patrice to pull the grantee book, not yet. Something in her, some old caution, told her that whatever was written on that page, she wanted to read it sitting down somewhere private, with time, the way you read a biopsy result. She wrote down the book and page number instead, careful as a phone number, and she capped her pen over it. The house is already where it should be. Walter's voice came back to her from the sick room, dry as paper, and for the first time in a year she let herself hear it as something other than the medicine talking. "You want the lean volume too?" Patrice said, sliding the second book across, and that one near took Adrian's breath. Because the house that had quietly left Walter's name in the spring he died had, a year and a half later, been mortgaged. Heavily. There was a deed of trust recorded against the Dove Creek property, a refinance, a big round loan written out of a lender Adrienne had never heard of, a mortgage company with a downtown Atlanta address, and the borrower's name, signed and notarized and entered into the permanent record of Renfro County, Georgia, was Eleanor Whitfield. Adrienne sat very still. She read it 3 times to be sure she was not wanting it to say something it did not say. She was not. The plain ink said that Eleanor had gone up to Atlanta, sat at some closing table in some glass office 100 miles from anyone who knew her, and borrowed a great deal of money against the White House on Dove Creek Lane. Against a house that, according to the page Adrienne had just written down, had not been Walter's to leave to Eleanor, because Walter had already given it to somebody else before he passed. Eleanor had mortgaged a house she did not own. That was the moment the whole story turned over in Adrienne's hands, quiet as a key in a lock. For a week, she had been the humiliated wife. The woman walked out of her own anniversary dinner with her private heart read aloud to 18 people. She had come down to this cold basement, carrying that hurt like a stone in her chest. And she stood up out of it now into something else entirely, something with weight and consequence, because the question was no longer, why does Eleanor treat me like company? The question was, how is Eleanor paying for the throne she sits on? And the answer, written in the county's own books, was that she was paying for it with a house that was not hers, borrowed against in a city far enough away that nobody from Renfro would be at the table to ask the obvious question. Adrian thought of the tremor in Eleanor's hand at the dinner, the tipped pill bottle, the chalk under the powder. She had read those signs as a sick woman running on pride, and she had not been wrong. But she saw now they were the signs of something else too, of a woman living on borrowed money and borrowed time, holding up a front the way a failing heart holds up a blood pressure, by sheer strain, by squeezing harder and harder on less and less. The grandeur of those Sunday dinners, the good silver, the lemon oil worked into the table twice a year, the card with the stranger's name in her purse. Sutton. Adrian turned back through the lean volume until she found the closing again and read the fine print along the bottom. The part nobody reads, the part she had been trained by 2 lawsuits to read first. The loan officer of record, the name typed under the lender's seal, was M. Sutton. The same card that had stuck up out of Eleanor's purse at the anniversary dinner, that her elbow had swept away. Not a doctor, not a friend. The man in Atlanta who had handed Eleanor the money and asked, apparently, none of the questions a man in his position is paid to ask. Adrian copied it all down. The lender, the address, the amount, the date, M. Sutton, the recording stamp, the book and page. She charted it the way she would chart a long bad night, every line dated, every figure checked twice, her initials in the margin. When she was done, she had 2 pages of her yellow pad filled with the neat, plain hand of a woman who had spent her life writing down what other people could not stand to look at. She tore the pages out, folded them once, and slid them into the zip pocket of her nursing bag, next to Walter's envelope. The 2 of them rode there together now. The question and what she was beginning to suspect was the answer, separated by a 1/4 inch of canvas. "You find what you needed, Miss Adrienne?" Patrice asked, taking the heavy books back into her arms. "I believe I did," Adrienne said. Her voice did not shake. It had not shaken at the dinner table, and it did not shake now. "Patrice, can a person get a certified copy of these? Stamped, so it holds up. For court?" Patrice's eyebrows went up a little, but she was Renfro, and Renfro did not pry into a woman who had sat the last night with your grandmother. "Yes, ma'am. Couple dollars a page, I'll put the seal on myself. Then I'll take a certified copy of all of it," Adrian said. "The whole chain, from 1961 forward, and that deed of trust every page." She paused. "And I'll need the grantee book for that spring transfer, the one I wrote down, but I'd like to read that one alone, if it's all the same to you." Patrice carried the request off without a flicker, the way good country clerks do, and Adrian sat back down at the cold table to wait. And while she waited, she did not cry, and she did not rage, and she did not call Dexter, who would only have told her she was making something out of nothing again, the way he had told her she was making something out of nothing at every Christmas for 20 years. She folded her hands on the yellow pad and she breathed, slow, the way she taught frightened patients to breathe. And she thought about the word belong. "You'll never belong here." Eleanor had stood at the head of Walter's table and said that to 18 people, holding Adrian's diary open like scripture. And the strange thing, the thing that sat in Adrian's chest, now warm and steadying as a hand, was that Eleanor might be the only person in Renfro who did not yet understand whose house she had set it in. Adrian did not understand it fully herself, not yet. Not until she read the page Patrice was climbing the ladder to find, and not until she finally broke the wax seal on the envelope that had ridden against her hip for a year. But she felt the shape of it, the way she had learned to feel the shape of a thing coming, the change in the breathing, the hour the truth climbs. Walter had not been delirious. Walter had been telling her exactly what he had done. She thought of him in that last week, the grip of his hand so light it was hardly there, pressing the thick envelope into her palm. Don't open it till you need it. She had not needed it. For a year she had grieved him and held up his mother's house and let his son tell her to apologize. And the whole time the thing she needed had been zipped into the bag she carried to the bedside of every dying stranger in the county. There is a particular kind of ache in being loved more carefully than you knew, in finding out, too late to thank the man, that somebody had seen you clearly all along and acted on it in silence. Adrian felt that ache come up in her now, and she let it, sitting alone at the cold table with her steady hands folded, and it did not feel like grief exactly. It felt like being found. Patrice came back down the ladder with a thinner book, an older one, and set it on the counter, and she looked at Adrienne across the quiet basement with something gentle in her face. "It's marked," she said softly. "The page you wanted. I left it for you." Adrienne thanked her and did not move toward it. Not yet. She understood, with the same certainty that had told her at the dinner table to set her glass on the coaster, that the page in that book and the letter in her bag were two halves of one sentence, and that she did not want to read either of them in a courthouse basement on a borrowed half-hour before her afternoon shift. Some truths you owe a quieter room than that. She would read them together, that night, in the back bedroom where she had nursed the man who wrote them, with the porch swing creaking through the open window and her granddaughter's worn armrest catching the last of the light. And then she would know what she was holding, and then she would know exactly what to do with it. She gathered her certified pages, paid Patrice her few dollars, and climbed the stone steps back up into the Georgia heat of the square, past the diner on Route 11 where two old men lifted their coffee to her, past the steeple of the AME church 2 blocks down where she had served the deacon's supper, while Eleanor wondered aloud that they let nurses do that now. She got in her car. She set the bag on the seat beside her, the envelope and the certified deed of trust, and the 2 pages of her own neat charting all writing together. And for the first time in a week, sitting at the wheel with the engine ticking and the whole sleepy town going about its Tuesday around her, Adrienne Whitfield let herself smile, just barely, the small private smile of a woman who has finally found where the truth was written down. She had one stop left to make before she read those pages. There was a lawyer on the far side of the square, an old one, the only one in Renfro who had known Walter well enough to be trusted, and her name was on a brass plate that had not been polished in some years. Loretta Vance. Adrienne put the car in gear and drove the slow loop around the courthouse toward it, and she did not hurry, because she had learned a long time ago that the people who win are almost never the ones in a hurry. The brass plate beside the door said Loretta Vance, attorney at law, and under that, in smaller letters worn nearly smooth, wills and estates. And Adrienne stood on the sidewalk a moment in the heat looking at it before she went in. She had passed this door 1,000 times. Everybody in Renfro had. It sat between the shuttered shoe store and the insurance office on the south side of the square, and the green awning over it had faded to the color of old dollar bills, and there was a fern in the window that somebody watered faithfully. Adrienne had served Loretta Vance coffee at more than one church supper. She had never once imagined she would walk through that door carrying a nursing bag with 2 pages of her own charting and a year-old envelope zipped inside it. The bell over the door gave a tired little ring. Inside it was cool and dim and smelled of paper and pipe tobacco gone cold years ago, and a window unit labored in the back. A girl no older than 20 looked up from a computer, but before she could say anything, a voice came from the inner office, low and gravelly and amused. The voice of a woman who had smoked exactly 1 cigarette a day for 40 years and intended to keep doing so. "Is that Adrian Carter I hear at my door?" Carter, not Whitfield. Adrian had not been called by her own name, her girlhood name, in a long while, and something in her chest loosened at the sound of it. She came around the partition, and there was Loretta Vance behind a desk drowned in folders. A small, fierce woman gone entirely silver, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and another pair on a chain around her neck. "Miss Loretta," Adrian said. "Sit." Vance pointed at the chair across from her without ceremony. "You nursed Walter Whitfield through the end of his life. I know that because Walter told me himself, the last time he was able to come down those steps out there, which was a harder trip for him than getting to heaven turned out to be." She studied Adrian over the tops of the second pair of glasses. "I have wondered when you would come and see me. I will tell you honestly, I expected you a year ago." Adrian sat. She set the nursing bag on her knees and did not open it yet. "Why would you expect me at all?" "Because Walter Whitfield was my client for 30 years, Vance said. "And he was not a careless man, and careful men do not come down to a lawyer's office 4 months before they pass to talk about the weather." She folded her spotted hands on the desk. "Now, I am bound by a great many rules about what I can say first and what I can only answer. So suppose you tell me what brought you in out of the heat, and we will see where it lands." So Adrian told her. She did it the way she gave report at the end of a shift, plainly, in order, leaving nothing out and adding nothing. She unzipped the bag and laid the certified pages on the desk one at a time, turning each one so Vance could read it right side up, and she narrated as she went. The chain of title from 1961. Walter sole owner, decade on decade. The transfer recorded in the spring he died, the house leaving his name months before the funeral. The grantee given only as a book and page she had not yet pulled. Then the lien volume, the deed of trust recorded a year and a half later, the Atlanta lender, the big round number, and the borrower signed and notarized into the permanent record of Renfro County, Eleanor Whitfield. Vance had pulled the lower pair of glasses down onto her nose somewhere in the middle of it, and by the end she was not amused anymore. She read the deed of trust page herself, slowly, running one finger down the margin the way Adrian ran a finger down a medication list, and when she got to the bottom, she stopped on a line and tapped it twice. "Monsieur Sutton," she said quietly. "Loan officer of record." She looked up. "You found a card. In her purse. At the dinner." She covered it with her arm. Of course she did. Vance took the glasses off entirely and rubbed the bridge of her nose, and for a moment she looked every one of her years. "Adrian, do you understand what you have brought me? I want to be sure you understand it before either of us says another word, because once it is said in this office, it cannot be unsaid." "I understand it," Adrian said. "Eleanor borrowed a great deal of money against a house, and the house was not in her name when she borrowed it. The record says Walter had already signed it over to somebody else. That is exactly what the record says." Vance set the glasses down on the deed of trust like a paperweight. A person cannot mortgage what they do not own. Not legally. To do it, you have to sit at a closing table 100 miles from anybody who would know better. And you have to represent to a lender that the property is yours to pledge. And you have to sign your name to that representation. And if it is not true? She let the sentence hang, the way a careful woman does. "Well, then there is the matter of what you told the bank, and the matter of how the bank's money is ever to be made whole, and those are not little matters, and they are not Renfro matters. They are matters that wear suits. Adrienne sat very still in the cool, dim office and let that settle. Out on the square, a truck went by, and the fern trembled in the window unit's draft, and somewhere the girl in the front was tapping at her keys. Then there is the question that makes the rest of it move, Vance said, and she leaned forward and put her finger back on the first certified page, on the line about the spring transfer, on the grantee given only by book and page. Who did Walter sign it over to? Because that is the name that everything turns on. If Walter gave this house to a charity or a cousin in Tennessee, then your mother-in-law has a terrible problem and it is hers alone. But if Walter gave this house to somebody close, she lifted her eyes. Have you read that page, Adrienne? The grantee book? No, ma'am. Why not? It was sitting right there in front of you in that basement. Patrice would have brought it up the ladder for you. She did bring it up, Adrienne said. I asked her to mark it and leave it. I didn't read it. She looked down at her own hands, the steady hands, folded on the bag. And there's a thing I haven't told you yet. The week before Walter passed, when his hands had got so light you could barely feel them, he pressed an envelope into mine. Sealed. He told me, don't open it till you need it. The house is already where it should be. She drew a breath. I have carried that envelope in this bag for a year, Miss Loretta, to every bedside in this county. I never opened it. I told myself I didn't need it because I didn't yet understand what I had or what kind of woman I had married into. I think I was afraid of it. Loretta Vance was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her gravelly voice had gone gentle in a way that did not suit her face. Walter came in here, she said, and he sat in that exact chair you are sitting in, and he was so weak I had Margaret bring him sweet tea with both hands. And he said to me, Loretta, my Eleanor has got it in her head to sell that house the minute I am gone. He said, she will sell it out from under the grandbabies to keep up her front, and there is only one person under that roof who has never once asked me for a thing, who has wiped my face and changed my bed and sat the whole night when nobody else would come. And I aim to put the house where it cannot be sold, and where that person will always have a door. Vance tapped the desk once. He did not tell me he had pressed you an envelope, but I knew Walter Whitfield, and I will tell you what I believe is written on that page in the grantee book. And I believe it is written in that envelope in your bag too, in his own hand, because Walter believed in saying a true thing twice, so it would hold. Adrienne did not ask her to say the name. She found she did not need to hear it from anyone's mouth but the papers. And besides, she already knew. She had known since the courthouse basement when the cold came up through the floor into her hands. She had perhaps known since the sick room and only refused for a year to write it down. I'd like to read it tonight, Adrienne said. At home. In his room. I think I owe him that much, to read it where he wrote it, and not in a hurry. She gathered the certified pages and squared their edges. And then I'd like to come back and see you, and I would like to know what a person does next, the proper way. The way that holds up. The proper way, Vance said, and now the old fierceness came back into her, and she put both pairs of glasses down and looked at Adrienne like a woman picking up a tool she had set aside too long. The proper way is that I am the attorney for Walter Whitfield's estate, and that estate is not settled, whatever your mother-in-law may have told this town. The proper way is that I have every right, every reason to call the surviving family into my office to settle it. All of them, including Eleanor. A small, dry smile. She will come, too. She would not miss a chance to sit in a lawyer's office and be the widow. She has no idea there is anything in the record but her own grand name. Vance picked up a pen and wrote something on a pad. You go home and read your letter, Adrienne Carter. And when you have read it, you call me, and we will pick the day. And on that day, you will not say one word. You will let her perform. You have let her perform for 20 years. What is 1 hour more? And then I will slide one piece of paper across this desk, and the performing will be over. Adrian stood, and she thanked her, and at the door she stopped with her hand on the cool brass handle. Miss Loretta. When I walked out of that dinner, my husband called me in the parking lot and asked me to come back in and apologize to her for embarrassing the family. She said it without heat. I have been turning that over all week, and I think I finally understand what I did instead. I never raised my voice, I just stopped holding it up. Vance looked at her a long moment. Stopped holding what up, honey? Her, Adrian said. All of it. The whole front. I have been the one carrying the corner of it nobody could see, and I just set it down. Then she went out into the heat, and the bell gave its tired ring behind her. She worked her shift that afternoon because there was a man on Cypress Street with 3 days left in him and a daughter driving in from Savannah who would not make it in time, and Adrian would not leave him alone for anything written on any paper anywhere. She sat with him. She charted his comfort in her small, even hand, dated and timed and initialed, and she held a cool cloth to his forehead. And when his breathing changed in the late afternoon, the way it does, she did not look away from it, because she never had. That was the thing about her that Eleanor had mistaken all those years, for being slow, for being soft, for being somebody who would never belong. Adrian Whitfield did not look away from hard things. She wrote them down. It was full dusk by the time she came home to the white two-story on Dove Creek Lane, and the porch swing Walter built moved a little in the evening air, though no one sat in it, and the windows upstairs were dark. Eleanor's car was gone from the drive. Wednesday. Choir. She would be at the AME Hall 2 blocks down, sitting in the front the way she sat everywhere in the front, telling the altos what they were doing wrong. Adrian had the house to herself, which was its own strange word, herself, in a house where she had spent 20 years being treated as a guest. She went down the hall to the back bedroom, Walter's room, the room where she had nursed him, and she turned on the small lamp and sat on the edge of the bed with her nursing bag. And she took out the envelope at last. It was thick, cream-colored, gone soft at the corners from a year of riding against her hip. Her name was on the front in Walter's hand, the letters gone shaky at the end the way his hands had gone, and the wax seal he had pressed himself was still whole. She held it a moment. Then she worked her thumb under the flap, gentle as she did everything, and broke the seal. Inside there were 2 things. There was a letter, folded in thirds, several pages of it, and there was a document on heavier paper, blue-backed, the kind with a county stamp in the corner, the kind that means a thing is real and recorded and cannot be argued with by anyone in a kitchen. She read the document first, because she was who she was, and she read it the way she read a chart, top to bottom, taking nothing for granted. Warranty deed. Walter Whitfield, grantor. The property described by metes and bounds, and then in plain words, the house and lot known as the Dove Creek Place. And the grantee, the person to whom Walter Whitfield, being of sound mind, in consideration of love and affection and care, did grant and convey the property and all of it, that spring, 4 months before he died, recorded and stamped and witnessed. Adrienne Carter Whitfield. Her own name, in the county's permanent ink, on the house she had been told 18 times over she would never belong in. She sat with it on her knees a long while, and she did not cry, and she did not laugh, and the lamp hummed, and out the open window the swing creaked once, and was still. Then she set the deed gently on the quilt beside her, and unfolded the letter, and she began, by the light of the small lamp in the room where the man had died, to read what Walter Whitfield had wanted to say to her twice so that it would hold. She read the first lines, and they were her name, and then the words, "If you are reading this, then you have finally let yourself need it. And that is the only thing I ever worried about, that you would go on carrying everyone and never let yourself be carried." She pressed her hand flat against the page a moment, the way she would steady a frightened patient, except the patient now was herself, and then she read on. She read all of it, and what was in the rest of that letter she would hear again soon, in another room, in another woman's gravelly voice, read aloud across a desk to the one person in Renfrew who still did not know the floor had already gone out from under her. So she folded it back along its worn creases, and she sat in the quiet, full of it. It was when she rose to put the deed and the letter somewhere safe for the night that she saw the drawer. The bureau against the wall was hers, the one private thing she kept in that house. The bottom drawer, where she had always kept the small leather diary. The one her own mother had given her. The one with the little brass lock no bigger than a thumbnail. She kept the key on the ring with her car keys. There was no other key, and the drawer was not shut right. It stood a half-inch proud of the others, the way a drawer stands when something has been done to it and put back by someone in a hurry. Adrian crouched down and looked, and there in the soft old pine around the lock were the marks, bright splinters, the wood gouged pale and fresh where something thin and flat, a butter knife, a letter opener, had been worked in against the little brass tongue until it gave. She knelt there on the floor of the back bedroom a long moment, looking at those bright gouges in the wood, and the last small question she had been carrying since the anniversary dinner closed quietly in her hands like a door easing shut. She had wondered, every day of that week, how her mother-in-law had come to be holding her most private pages at the head of the table. Now she knew. Eleanor had not found the diary. Eleanor had gone looking for it. She had come into this room, Walter's room, Adrian's room, with something thin and patient, and she had pried the little lock her son's wife trusted, and she had read through 20 years of a woman's private heart hunting for one thing: proof. Proof that the nurse meant to leave, meant to take, meant to be exactly the grasping outsider Eleanor needed her to be, so that the day the house came up for selling there would be no one left who could say a word. She had pried open the wrong drawer. She had been so busy hunting for proof in Adrian's diary that she never once thought to wonder what was sealed in Adrian's bag, or recorded down at the courthouse 2 blocks from her own choir practice, under a name she would have died before she said kindly. Eleanor had read the one book in that room that held no power at all, the diary, the feelings, the soft private nothing, and she had stood up and read it to 18 people like a verdict. And the whole time, 4 feet away in a pried drawer she did not even bother to search, and a year long in a nursing bag she would never have stooped to open, the only document that mattered had been waiting with Adrian's name on it. Adrian stood up slowly. She slid the deed and the letter into the inside pocket of her bag, next to the certified pages, where they would ride safe. She closed the wounded drawer all the way, gently, and she did not try to hide the marks, because she had decided, kneeling there, that she would not hide one single thing ever again in that house. Then she went to the kitchen and she dialed the number Loretta Vance had written on her pad, and when the gravelly voice answered, she said only, "I read it, Miss Loretta. Both of them. It's my name." There was a silence on the line, and then the old attorney let out a long breath, and she said, "Then we'll pick the day." And Adrian stood in the dark kitchen of the house that was hers, looking out the window toward the AME hall 2 blocks down, where Eleanor Whitfield was at that very moment telling the altos how it ought to be done, and she said, "Pick Sunday." Sunday came hot and white over Renfro, and the office on the square that was always dim was dimmer still with the blinds drawn against the noon. Loretta Vance had set 5 chairs in a half circle before her desk and put a pitcher of sweet tea on the side table that nobody touched. Eleanor came last, the way she always came last, so a room would be full before she entered it. She wore her good navy, the suit she had worn to bury Walter, and she carried her pocketbook on her arm like a small shield. And when she sat, she kept her spine off the back of the chair, the way she had taught the altos to sit. And she looked at the certified pages squared on the lawyer's desk and mistook them, the way she had mistaken so many things, for her own. "I am glad we are finally seeing to this," Eleanor said, before Vance had said a word. "It has gone on too long, Loretta, this dragging. Walter would not have wanted it dragged. I have a buyer half interested in the Dove Creek place, and I would like this settled." "We will come to the house," Vance said. Dexter sat at his mother's right with his hat in both hands, turning the brim, and he would not look down the half circle at his wife. Adrian sat at the far end where Vance had placed her, the nursing bag on her knees, her hands folded upon it. She said nothing. She had been asked to say nothing, and she had learned this past week that her quiet was the one language Eleanor had never found a way to argue with. "Before there is any talk of buyers," Vance said, "there is a letter. Walter left it in his own hand, and decency says it gets read before a single dollar is discussed." She settled the nearer pair of glasses on her nose. "I will read it the way he wrote it," and she read it. She read Walter Whitfield's shaking sentences into that drawn and humming room, his words about who had sat the long nights and changed the bed and wiped his face when no one else would come. He did not name Eleanor's cruelty anywhere in it. He named only the care. When Vance read the line where Walter wrote that he had put the house where it could never be sold and had put it there in the spring while his mind was wholly his own, Eleanor's chin lifted a half-inch. "He was not well that spring," she said. "He was examined that same week by 2 doctors, and it is in the file," Vance answered without looking up. She read the last of it, Walter asking that the one reading the letter be allowed at last to be carried after a lifetime of carrying everyone else. Then she folded the pages along their worn creases and laid them down. She drew a single sheet from beneath the certified pages, blue-backed, stamped in the corner by the county, and she did not announce it. She slid it across the desk with 2 fingers until it stopped square in front of Eleanor, the way you hand a thing to someone who has to read it for herself. Eleanor reached for it with the same ringed hand that had smoothed the diary flat on the anniversary cloth. The rings caught the low light. Her hand was not steady, the way it had not been steady at the dinner, and Adrian, out of 20 years of habit, marked the tremor and said nothing. Eleanor read the top of the page. She read the meets and the bounds and then the plain words, the house and lot known as the Dove Creek place. And she read the grantee, the one to whom Walter Whitfield, being of sound mind, in consideration of love and affection and care, had granted and conveyed the whole of it. Adrian Carter Whitfield. She read it once. The window unit ran, and there was no other sound. She read it a second time, her lips moving on the middle name she had never once said with any kindness. Carter. And then Eleanor Whitfield went very still. Stiller than Adrian had ever seen her. Stiller than she had stood even at the graveside, because at the graveside she had still believed she owned the house, and now, in the space of one slid page, she understood she had not owned it in more than a year. "That is not possible," Eleanor began, and stopped, because she was a proud woman, but she was not a foolish one. and the arithmetic was already moving behind her eyes. The refinance she had signed that spring in the bright office up in Atlanta. The papers a smiling young man named Sutton had slid before her, calling her Mrs. Whitfield, never once asking to see a title, because she carried herself like a woman who would of course hold the deed to her own home. The money she had drawn against these walls to keep the navy suits and the front pew and the half-interested buyers of her life. She had borrowed against a house that, on the very day she signed, already belonged to the daughter-in-law she had read aloud to shame. "Eleanor," Vance said, and there was no cruelty in her gravel, which was somehow worse. "You placed a lien upon a property you did not own. There will be a review. I have already written to the lender." She laid her hand flat upon a second folder she did not open, a folder thick with dates in a small, even nurse's hand. Every loan, every draw, charted and initialed like a patient's chart. "When they ask me for the timeline, I will give it to them. It is very complete." Dexter put his hat over his face with both hands. Then Vance slid one more page across the desk, but not toward Eleanor. She slid it to Adrian, a short typed letter waiting for a signature. "This places the Dove Creek house in trust for Walter's grandchildren," she said, "with you holding the door. No one signs it out from under those children again." Adrian read it the way she read everything, top to bottom, taking nothing on trust but the words in front of her, and then she lifted the pen and signed her whole name, the Carter still in it, in her steady hand. Eleanor did not perform her way out of the room. There was no performance left to give. She gathered her pocketbook and stood, and for the first time in 20 years, she walked out of a room ahead of no one, while the navy hung loose on her, and the door with its tired bell let her go. She drove home in the last of the light. She sat on the porch swing Walter had built with his own hands, the deed folded once in her lap, and let the chains take her weight. Behind the screen door, the grandchildren were laughing over something at the kitchen table. The swing moved, and she let it.